Nothing quite stings like a video game cancellation. The way the gaming hype train works is that projects are announced way before they're really ready to be shown off, and sold on their promise, which can make things difficult if they're not shaping up internally and need to be knocked on the head. However, it is very rare for an announced video game to never see the light of day completely. Sure, there have been plenty of high-profile cancellations throughout the years that players have been sad to see go, but if history is anything to go by, these troubled productions often do eventually see the light of day. Sure, they might not end up being the exact same game that was originally announced, or they may be more of a spiritual successor to a canned project than a straight revival, but with enough support and enough of a push from a publisher, anything can happen. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 cancelled video games that could still be saved. Number 8, Star Wars 1313. The biggest tragedy of EA acquiring the exclusive rights to Star Wars wasn't just that they go on to cancel the most interesting projects in favour of 2 middling Battlefront games, but that it all came at the cost of Star Wars 1313. One of the first then next-gen games to ever be unveiled, the bounty hunting title was going to cast players as a young Boba Fett exploring the criminal underworld of this galaxy far, far away, in an Uncharted-esque adventure. Of course, despite how promising it looked, LucasArts was all but completely closed following EA's deal, with the game never being heard of again after 2013. The original development team will probably never be the major production house they used to be, tragically, but 1313 could still see the light of day in one form or another. There is such a desire to see a story-driven experience set in this part of the Star Wars universe. And after the cancellation of both this and Ragtag, it would be an easy win for either EA or a future publisher to capitalize on. It might not be called 1313, and Boba Fett might be swapped out for a new character, but a bounty hunting game that focuses on Star Wars' criminal underbelly should one day, hopefully, fingers crossed, become a reality. Number 7, Brothers in Arms Furious 4. Fans are long overdue a new Brothers in Arms game. While Call of Duty and Medal of Honor dominated the World War II first-person shooter scene back in the day, Gearbox's franchise was always the unsung hero of the entire subgenre, taking a more mature approach to the subject matter and toning down the bombast somewhat in favour of character drama and more realistic action. All the original titles are stellar, but the third dropped at a time where World War II fatigue was at an all-time high, and its peers had jumped to the present day. Consequently, it sold pretty poorly, and the fourth game was envisioned as a radical change for the series. After the success of Borderlands, Gearbox wanted something wackier, and Brothers in Arms Furious 4 was going to be a colourful co-op hero shooter about killing Hitler. Okay, for one mission, that kinda sounds awesome. Just about everyone but the developers though knew it was kind of a bad idea in the long run, and the game as a whole was canned in 2015, with a lot of the ideas apparently being rolled into Battleborn. Still, a Brothers in Arms 4, one that embraces the authenticity and tone of the original, is still very much possible. And Gearbox themselves have said they're pursuing ways to bring it to consoles with the help of external studios, which admittedly is what they did with Aliens Colonial Marines, so yeah, I've got no faith it'll actually be any good if it does come out. Number 6, Tekken Cross Street Fighter. Back when people actually made fighting games, the Street Fighter Tekken crossover was supposed to take over the world. For the very first time, the two worlds of the legendary fighting franchises were going to clash, and the two publishers were so convinced it was going to be an excuse to print money, they greenlit not only one, but 2 different crossover games. Essentially, the 2 titles, Street Fighter Cross Tekken and Tekken Cross Street Fighter, would ensure that both sides of the fanbase were catered to without compromise. The different games would allow the styles of the franchises to remain intact, particularly the delineation between 2D and 3D gameplay, with Street Fighter Cross Tekken being the first to release in 2012. Sadly, that title didn't sell as well as either publisher had hoped, and the second game went dark, with updates only coming sporadically and with the developers not showing anything other than a reveal poster ever since. Even now and then, there are rumours that the game is still in production, but with very few updates as to how far along it actually is. Interestingly, while writing this article, an update was provided on the project, with the studio reiterating that they still want to release the game, but that it might not make business sense to do so. Number 5, Crysis 4. The tale of Crytek is one of tragedy. The studio was responsible for birthing the still cutting-edge Crysis, making a name for themselves as being one of the most ambitious new creative forces of the early 2000s. Sadly, while they continued that franchise with the excellent console-based sequel, the third game pretty much killed them entirely. And after rumors that salaries were being withheld from employees, Crytek entered a period of turmoil. Struggling to get any project off the ground, in 2012 the company chillingly claimed that their future lay entirely in free-to-play experiences, announcing that a new Crysis game was being planned, but that it would be ingenuous to refer to it as Crysis 4. After shutting down a bunch of studios and restructuring entirely though, any kind of follow-up has long since been thought to be dead. But that doesn't mean another entry in the franchise is still off the table entirely. Despite the financial disappointment that hounded the third game, Crysis is still a lucrative IP, and while it might not be Crytek who are on development duties, there's no reason why a new studio can't take the reins. Hell, that's exactly what happened to their other property, a little series called Far Cry. Number 4, Knights of the Old Republic 3. In their constant effort to avoid every single open goal presented to them, EA have continued to not pursue creating Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 3. Why? Why do they keep doing this? Or why? Why do they keep not doing this? Despite the brand being one of the most valuable in the Star Wars gaming universe, reports suggest that the publisher has battered away pitches for a third release multiple times over the years. Even though developers inside BioWare, the studio behind the original game, have shown a major interest in returning to the IP. The reason why is admittedly pretty obvious, as EA treats single-player RPGs as financial poison, and there's no real way to transform this franchise into a live service multiplayer game without pissing off pretty much everyone who would buy it in the first place. Furthermore, the Old Republic MMO spin-off is kind of already doing that anyway, and is still chugging along for the publisher, and they probably wouldn't want to split the messaging or have one release undermine the other. All that said, Knights of the Old Republic 3 has to happen at some point. Fans have been begging for it for years, and with EA and BioWare both keenly aware of how much bad press they've gained recently, greenlighting this project at some point in the future would be a major step towards winning back those estranged players. Number 3, Heavenly Sword 2. Heavenly Sword was supposed to be the first major new IP for the PlayStation 3. With a huge marketing budget thrown at it and a respected developer in Team Ninja behind it, the action game looked the part, but for whatever reason it failed to connect with a mainstream audience. Reviews were pretty strong and the game itself was solid, primed with a great central character and a lush art style, but it failed to break even financially, only selling around 1.5 million copies. Consequently, the devs moved on to other projects, but Sony still owned the IP, and it could be a franchise they will eventually revisit. At one point, they did begin production on a sequel, but folded the project into a new property from Guerrilla Games. With this in mind, and considering how the world of Heavenly Sword seemed so ripe for exploration, it could be a project Sony attempt to revamp in the future. It's rare for the publisher to make a game and never try to make it work, even if they fumble the execution the first time around. Sony are the masters of reimagining properties, and Heavenly Sword should be the next in line. Number 2, Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 has always been a bit of a weird project. Even though original developers Techland left the franchise to create a spiritual successor in Dying Light, the series was apparently lucrative enough that publisher Deep Silver wanted to push forward with more games no matter what. In came Jaeger Development, the team behind the brilliant Spec Ops: The Line, to produce a full-fledged sequel for current-gen consoles. Their hard work was shown off in 2014, and it looked fine. It looked alright. The sequel appeared to be nothing more than a serviceable, forgettable zombie game, leading many to wonder why Deep Silver would recruit such a talented studio just to put them to work on a project that was so pedestrian. A year later, Jaeger were dropped from the game entirely, leading the publisher to restructure the project and bring in a new team. Nothing has been released from the game since then, but the title is apparently still in development, this time with Sumo Digital at the helm. Still with nothing to show and nothing more than a vague promise from the publisher, it might still be a while yet before Dead Island 2, if that's what it's even called, makes a return. Number 1, Scalebound. One of the saddest cancellations of the entire generation and my entire life so far, Scalebound should have been something special. A collaboration between Microsoft and Platinum Games, the blockbuster was set to boast the developer's signature frenetic action, while also giving you a dragon as a companion. A dragon you could ride. It was awesome! Sadly, the game was in production at a time where Platinum was spread pretty thin, and was cancelled after Microsoft raised questions over its quality. Still, it had already wowed players, and they didn't take the chop lightly, petitioning for the game's revival ever since. While the Xbox maker has never budged in its decision, one unlikely party might be looking to bring it back: Nintendo. Platinum and Nintendo have always had a pretty strong relationship thanks to the Bayonetta series, and the latter company could be looking to strengthen that by reviving this project, if reports are to be believed anyway. While it might be a logistical minefield considering that the title was originally an Xbox exclusive, Microsoft and Nintendo have enjoyed an open partnership recently, and if the former has no interest in creating the game, they might happily give it to their new pals. So that's our list. What do you guys think down in the comments below about the chances of these games returning? And while you're there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.